following developing news of a fatal crash involving Bakersfield police officers and another vehicle. That crash happened on South Vineland and Muller roads just outside the Bakersfield city limits. 17's Michaela Armstrong joins us now in studio with what we know so far. Michaela?
There are a lot of unknowns in the fatal crash, but we know that the tragic accident happened overnight. The impact left 1 dead and 3 injured, and we are now learning the passengers in the vehicle involved in the crash were co-workers at Grimway Farms who were driving home from work. At around 2 in the morning, Bakersfield police officers chased a stolen car speeding down Weed Patch Highway. Officers say the driver was 21-year-old Michael Stevens. Stevens crashed the car and was taken into custody. After the chase ended, dispatchers received a call about a separate crash involving a Bakersfield police car and a Honda Accord at South Vineland and Muller roads. The officers were southbound on a road with stop signs for northbound and southbound lanes. The Honda Accord was traveling west. The 30-year-old man driving the Accord was killed, and a 34-year-old passenger named Anna Hernandez was taken to a hospital with major injuries. The 2 Bakersfield police officers were injured and taken to a nearby hospital with moderate to major injuries. The Highway Patrol is handling the investigation of the crash, and Officer Tomas Martinez says that the area is filled with 2-lane roads.
It's not very well lit. There's not much traffic, so sometimes people tend to drive there as if there's no one else on the roadway. So because of the conditions, because of the darkness in the roadway and the condition of the roadway, sometimes we do get some crashes out there.
This could have been a factor in the crash and speed if the officers were responding to assist in the chase of Stevens.
Sometimes if they call for another unit to come assist, maybe they had a known last location, so they could possibly be what we call circulating the area, searching that area to see if they can locate that suspect.
The officers involved in the crash were 23 and 24 years old. But there's still a lot we don't know. BPD wouldn't say if the officers ran a stop sign, if the officers had their red lights on or their sirens on, how fast they were driving, or if dispatchers knew that they were responding to assist officers in the chase of Stevens, if that was the case.
And meantime, the family of the man killed in that crash says they are seeking justice. 17's Karen Marroquin spoke to the family's attorney.
A parent's worst nightmare is to get a phone call in the middle of the night telling them that their child has been killed. And that's what the family is grappling with right now. They're in a state of shock.
Attorney Daniel Rodriguez represents the family of Laris Ocampo, who died in an accident on his way home from work. It happened yesterday at about 2:30 in the morning just outside of Bakersfield. According to the California Highway Patrol, the police vehicle was traveling south on Vineland Road and a Honda Accord was traveling west on Muller Road. On the corner of those streets is a stop sign, letting drivers on Vineland Road know to halt and grant the right-of-way to those driving on Muller Road. That is why, according to Rodriguez, BPD is at fault.
What's the point in rushing to a place to try to assist somebody if you hurt or kill someone on the way over there because you disobeyed the law?
According to BPD, the officers involved in the crash were on their way to back up another team pursuing a reportedly stolen truck.
Police have kept details secret about this crash, but 17 News has learned that one officer might face manslaughter charges in connection with that crash. 17's Michaela Armstrong has been investigating and joins us in studio now with the latest on what we know. Michaela.
After weeks of unanswered questions from police about this deadly crash, these court documents give a first glimpse into the investigation by Highway Patrol. However, both BPD and CHP had no comment, saying the case is still under investigation. And 17 News has obtained court documents filed by the Highway Patrol stating based on the circumstances of the collision, the driver of the Ford Taurus was in violation of Penal Code Section 192C1, also known as gross vehicular manslaughter, which requires proof that the driver acted with gross negligence. That Ford Taurus was a marked BPD car. There were 2 officers in the car, but BPD and CHP refused to say who was driving the car. Attorney Daniel Rodriguez, who was representing the family of one of the victims, Mario Lares, who was killed during the crash, says gross negligence is obvious.
If he was going 70, 75 miles per hour, 80 or even more, that's not just mere negligence, simple negligence, that's gross negligence. The question becomes, is he going to be treated, is this officer going to be treated like he's above the law because he's got a badge? Is he going to get a free pass? Or is he going to be treated the way you and I would be treated?
After weeks since the crash, with police and highway patrol remaining tight-lipped, 17's Michaela Armstrong has more details tonight about that man's side of the story. Michaela?
Tomorrow marks 7 weeks since 2 Bakersfield police officers were involved in the deadly crash, in which the issuing officer states, quote, "I believe there is probable cause to issue a search warrant for the medical record of the above-mentioned parties to establishing that the felony of Penal Code 192C1, gross vehicular manslaughter, was committed by the driver of the 2016 Ford Taurus."
Well, today marks 8 weeks now since 2 Bakersfield police officers were involved in a crash that left one man dead and another person seriously injured. For weeks now, the Highway Patrol has declined to answer our questions about the accident, including which officer was driving, whether the officers were wearing safety belts, if the police car's emergency lights and siren were activated, and if anyone involved in the accident was given a drug or alcohol test at the scene. You can find more on this story on our website, KGET.com.
It was pitch black, so I came to a stop sign, and from the corner of my eye, I thought it was just a cop like sitting in the dark. And then when I made the left turn, I realized that the cop car was smoking and it was crushed.
Antonio Valencia was on his lunch break around 2 in the morning when he encountered the deadly crash between 2 Bakersfield police officers and another vehicle. When officers arrived, Valencia says they went straight to the police.
The first people I seen them take were the cops, but I know that they were trying to work and get the other people out of the car because it was upside down.
It's been 10 weeks since 2 Bakersfield police officers were involved in a crash in Lamont that killed a man and seriously injured a woman. CHP has declined to answer our questions about the incident, including which officer was driving, if the patrol car's emergency lights or siren were activated, and if anyone involved in the accident was given a drug or alcohol test.
Tomorrow marks 12 weeks. Today, local attorney Daniel Rodriguez confirmed he has filed a lawsuit against the city of Bakersfield on behalf of Hernandez and her family.
The lawsuit is against the city of Bakersfield. Why? For at least 3 reasons. The first reason is that they are the employer of the person who's driving the police car, Officer Ricardo Robles. Okay. So an employer is responsible for the acts of its employees if it occurs during the scope of work.
With CHP still not releasing many details about the crash after more than 3 months, this lawsuit is the next step in what these families hope will get them closer to justice.
From all the evidence that we have thus far, the information we've been able to gather, it's pretty clear cut. They didn't have the overhead lights on, didn't have the sirens on, blew the stop sign, and was speeding. And that's not the first time.
Seeking an unspecified amount of money in general and special damages. For weeks now, the Highway Patrol has declined to answer our questions about the incident, including which officer was driving, whether the officers were wearing safety belts.
The Highway Patrol issued a warrant for the officer's medical records to possibly charge the driver of the police car with gross vehicular manslaughter, and if anyone involved in the accident was given a drug or alcohol test.
Today marks 23 weeks since 2 Bakersfield police officers were involved in a deadly crash near Lamont. And if anyone involved in the crash was given a drug or alcohol test, we will continue to follow this story.
It has now been 26 weeks. The Highway Patrol has declined to answer our questions about the incident, including which one of the officers was driving.
It has now been 32 weeks since 2 Bakersfield police officers were involved in a deadly crash. You can find much more on this story on our website, KGET.com.
And we begin tonight with your 17 follow-up file. 8 months after a fatal crash between a BPD cruiser and another vehicle, there are shocking allegations tonight about the officer who was driving that police car. 17's Michaela Armstrong has been following this case and joins us now with the latest. Michaela?
Jim, the attorney for the family of the man who was killed, says technical information retrieved from the police car could lead to murder charges against an officer.
Attorney Daniel Rodriguez says the black box of the police car involved in the January 19th crash shows the car was traveling at an excessive speed just seconds before the horrific crash.
The GPS shows us that the police officer got that car going up to 109 miles per hour. Mind you, the speed limit is 55. At time of impact, he was going 78 miles per hour in the intersection, and this is at 2:30 in the morning.
Law enforcement has been tight-lipped about what happened the morning of the crash. Months later, Rodriguez says he has not gotten answers from CHP.
I've never had a case take this long. Usually 3 or 4 months tops, and in this case, it's been 8 months, and we still don't have it.
However, BPD did provide Rodriguez with a report that reveals jarring details of what transpired the morning of the crash. One is that the officers were traveling west on Edison, east of Vineland, where the crash took place, outside of Bakersfield city limits. As far as who was driving, according to Rodriguez, the report shows the driver of the car was Officer Ricardo Robles, but the car was checked out by Officer Travion Cobbins. According to BPD, Officer Robles is currently on administrative leave, and Officer Cobbins has returned to full duty. Another stunning detail are the images of both of the vehicles after the crash, showing the impact from the dangerous speed the police car was going.
That one of the things that can be considered and to take a case out of vehicular manslaughter and turn it into second-degree murder is if you're going over 100 miles an hour. The law is very clear in that regard. Okay. So here, the evidence from the horse's own mouth is 109 miles an hour. So that is sufficient grounds for that, for a murder charge to be made.
A missing element in the report was if the officers had their lights and sirens on. Rodriguez says from his own investigation, it does not seem likely.
We have reason to believe that the overheads were not on, the sirens weren't on, and the headlights weren't on. Okay, based on that, what that witness had said in the area that we interviewed.
With many questions still remaining, Rodriguez says he will continue to push for the CHP report.
Early on in the investigation, BPD Sergeant Robert Pears said it's presumed the officers were trying to catch up to the pursuit before the deadly crash. But that goes against the BPD's own policy on high-speed chases. One policy states there should be no paralleling of a pursuit route and that officers should remain in their assigned area and should not become involved with the pursuit unless directed otherwise by a supervisor. We still don't know if the officers were directed by a supervisor to join the pursuit, but we do know they were driving parallel to the pursuit route when the crash happened. Another policy says officers shall exercise sound judgment and care with due regard for life and property when responding to an emergency call. It goes on to say officers shall reduce speed at all street intersections to such a degree that they shall have complete control of the vehicle.
It has now been 38 weeks since 2 Bakersfield police officers were involved in a deadly crash. It happened January 19th in Lamont.
It has now been 47 weeks since 2 Bakersfield police officers were involved in a deadly crash.
We begin here at 5 o'clock with breaking news. A Bakersfield police officer has now been charged with 2 felonies in connection with a deadly crash that happened almost a year ago. Officer Ricardo Robles, a 2-year veteran of the BPD, is facing charges of vehicular manslaughter for the death of an innocent driver.
Prosecutors today announcing that Robles has been charged with 1 count of vehicular manslaughter with gross negligence, 2 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, and 1 count of reckless driving on a highway. The 24-year-old is out on $80,000 bail. His arraignment is set for January 10th.
We have 17 News team coverage for you tonight. Robert Price breaks down today's announcement with more on the charges Robles is now facing. Rob Hagan will have a look at the deadly history of local law enforcement officers charged in car crashes.
But we begin with 17's Alex Fisher with a breakdown on what led to the crash in the night on that deserted county road last January. Alex?
In order to understand how we got to this point, it is important to see how this crash unfolded. It all started around 2 a.m. the morning of January 19th when officers tried to pull over a stolen truck on California Avenue near Oak Street. The driver took off, heading east on California Avenue, past Bakersfield High School, and then eventually getting onto Edison Highway. It was at that point officers called off the pursuit. It was just too dangerous. But just 4 minutes later, other officers spotted the same stolen truck heading south on Weed Patch Highway. Those officers kicked off the pursuit again. The stolen truck crashed off Weed Patch Highway near Mountain View Middle School. The driver, 21-year-old Michael Stevens of Delano, was arrested. Now, just about the time the stolen truck turned south on Weed Patch Highway, BPD officers Ricardo Robles and Trevion Cobbins, in a 2-officer car, started racing toward the chase. Bakersfield police have declined to say what Robles and Cobbins were doing. Were they even authorized to be in this pursuit? Police won't say. What we do know from the CHP investigation is that their cruiser was traveling south on South Vineland Road at speeds sometimes topping 100 miles per hour. That is a 2-lane road in a very rural area. The CHP says the car's emergency lights and sirens were off as they barreled down the darkened roadway. Meanwhile, 31-year-old Mario Lares and his passenger, 34-year-old Ana Hernandez, they just got off work at a packing shed. They were headed home in Lares' 2014 Honda Accord, and they were going westbound on Muller Road and directly in the path of that oncoming patrol unit. The patrol car was going over 70 miles per hour when it ran the stop sign at Vineland Road. Lares was killed in the crash, and Hernandez had to be airlifted to the hospital with major injuries. Both officers were also taken to the hospital, but they survived. Alex Fisher, 17 News.
All right, thanks, Alex. Early on in the investigation, BPD Sergeant Robert Pear confirmed the officers were trying to catch up to the pursuit before the deadly crash. But that goes against the department's own policy on high-speed chases. One policy says there should be no paralleling of a pursuit route, and officers should remain in their assigned areas and not become involved unless directed by a supervisor. The BPD has not revealed if the officers were directed by a supervisor to join the pursuit, but we do know they were driving parallel to the pursuit route when the crash happened. Another policy says officers shall exercise sound judgment and care with due regard for life and property when responding to an emergency call. It goes on to say officers shall reduce speed at all street intersections to such a degree that they shall have complete control of the vehicle.
Mario Lares, the man who was killed in the crash, was born and raised in Bakersfield and attended Foothill High School. He had just celebrated his 31st birthday. Some 10 years ago, Lares met his future wife on Facebook, but she lived in Mexico. Lares eventually went to visit her, and they dated for 5 years before getting married in March of 2020. That's when Lares came back to Bakersfield and began the long, drawn-out process of petitioning the government so his wife could move to the U.S. Despite the long-distance relationship, Mario Lares never failed to call his wife after he got home from his job at Grimway Farms at around 2:30 in the morning local time. But on the morning of January 19th, that call from Lares never came. Lares' loved ones tell 17 News he was planning on starting a family of his own at the time of his death. The BPD today released a statement on the DA's decision to file charges in this case, and it reads in part, "We cannot fathom the effect this incident has had on those involved in the collision and their family. We take very seriously the responsibilities we have to our community and have the highest expectations for ourselves and the service we deliver." The statement goes on to say Officer Robles will remain on administrative leave until the end of the BPD's investigation.
The charges filed against Officer Ricardo Robles would seem to be an indication that no one is above the law. But not everyone agrees with that line of thinking, as 17's Robert Price reports.
Depending on how one looks at it, prosecuting law enforcement officers for behavior that can be deemed reckless can be challenging or it can be straightforward. Police officers and prosecutors are almost always partners in the effort to maintain lawful order. One investigates, protects, detains. The other applies the law to the circumstances at hand, the rights of citizenship against the obligations. 24-year-old Bakersfield police officer Ricardo Robles allegedly ran a stop sign in the very early morning hours of January 19th and crashed into another car, killing the driver and seriously injuring his passenger, as well as both officers in the patrol car. A tragic but unforeseen collateral circumstance or an intolerable abuse of authority. To District Attorney Cynthia Zimmer, obligated to decide whether to charge and what to charge, vehicular manslaughter or something even more serious, it was clear-cut. Zimmer would not comment on camera, but did say, "We reviewed all facts and circumstances in reaching a decision supported by law." Asked to describe the line between legitimate and illegitimate use of speed and other driving tactics, she demurred. "That is a court argument," she said. But attorney Daniel Rodriguez, who is representing the family of 31-year-old Mario Laris, who was killed in the 2:20 a.m. crash at the pitch-black corner of Muller Road in South Vineland, south of Bakersfield, suggested Robles is getting off easy. Rodriguez, who is out of state, said in a statement, "We're left wondering if the fact that Robles is a police officer had anything to do with the DA's decision to file vehicular manslaughter charges instead of second-degree murder charges. Because, after all, the DA's office works side by side with the BPD day in and day out. Maybe justice for the police in this county is different than for the rest of us." Officer Robles is on paid administrative leave, where he is likely to remain until there's a verdict in his trial. The Bakersfield Police Department issued a statement shortly after the charges were announced. A statement of empathy, and that's one aspect of this tragedy that is undeniable and beyond any attorney's attempt at persuasion. A life is lost and a family diminished. In Bakersfield, Robert Price, 17 News.
17's Rob Hagan has been following incidents tied to law enforcement officers involved in deadly crashes and the collateral damage left behind. He joins us now in studio with more. Rob?
Jim, some of these accidents date back as far as 2008 and others as recent as just last month. Some were pedestrians, some were in their vehicles or on their motorcycles, but all of the people in this story shared twisted metal with law enforcement.
Destruction, injury, even death, all caused by terrible crashes involving sheriff's deputies and police officers in Kern County. 2011, 2 lives taken in the blink of an eye when Deputy John Swearingen took his eyes off the road to grab his radio. He was traveling 80 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone on Norris Road with no lights or siren when he hit 24-year-old Daniel Heiler and 30-year-old Crystal Jolly as they pushed a motorcycle across the darkened roadway. Swearingen took a plea deal, a misdemeanor for vehicular manslaughter, 480 hours of community service, and 3 years probation. A lawsuit was settled for $8.8 million for the Heiler and Jolly families. 2017, Kern Deputy Nicholas Clerico pleading no contest to vehicular manslaughter after running a red light on Northchester Avenue and slamming into 72-year-old Nancy Joyce Garrett, killing her instantly. Deputy Clerico was traveling 85 miles per hour when he struck Garrett's vehicle at about 2 in the morning. She was coming back from a Dodgers game. He was going to assist another deputy in a bar fight. Garrett's family settled for $2.5 million in the lawsuit against Kern County. Clerico was sentenced to 240 hours of community service. 2018, $3.8 million paid out to the family of 59-year-old Larry Meharry, struck and killed on his motorcycle by a sheriff's deputy-involved crash July 14, 2015 on Norris Road. Sergeant Marvin Gomez tried turning south on Airport Drive on a red arrow to assist with a domestic violence call. Meharry was killed on his brand new Harley. Prosecutors declined to charge Gomez for vehicular manslaughter. 2008, Deputy James Throne killed May 23rd at Blackburn Street and Weed Patch Highway in a collision with another deputy involved in the same chase. October 7th, 2023, 2 people died in a crash on Highway 178 when 31-year-old Jack Lee Brown crossed into the other lane near Kelso Valley Road, hitting 2 motorcycles and spinning into 41-year-old Deputy Amanda Plug. Brown and one of the motorcyclists died at the scene. The other motorcyclist was treated for serious injuries. Plug was not injured. The crash remains under investigation. October 8th, 2023. 21-year-old Enrique Lavera Carrillo is facing attempted murder charges after McFarland police say he intentionally crashed his vehicle into a deputy's patrol car during a pursuit. The deputy sustained minor injuries. November 10th, 2023. 18-year-old Donovan Diaz from Shafter was killed during a high-speed pursuit on Chester Avenue in Bakersfield. Police say it started when Diaz allegedly ran from a traffic stop near Mount Vernon and Gateway Avenue. The pursuit ended after he lost control of the SUV, causing it to roll and crash into an Albertsons, landing on its side. Diaz died at the scene.
Also, a settlement conference is set in March for a man who claims the BPD used excessive force during a police pursuit June 2022, crushing his legs with a patrol car. In studio, Rob Hagan, 17 News.
All right, thanks, Rob. When it comes to the South Vineland crash, there are still several questions investigators are declining to answer. That is despite an in-depth investigation that lasted nearly a year. Those questions include, were the officers wearing safety belts? Had the officers informed dispatchers where they were and where they were going? Were the officers authorized to be in a pursuit? Was anyone involved in the accident given a drug or alcohol test? And did the officer driving the car attempt to brake before the accident? When we reached out to the BPD with our list of unanswered questions this morning, they directed us to the Highway Patrol. The CHP also refused to answer and directed us to the District Attorney's Office. The DA refused to comment, saying the case is pending.
We have much more on this story on our website, KGET.com. Just scan the QR code you see on your screen here for a full list of stories, including updates on lawsuits filed in connection to this crash and more on the Highway Patrol's investigation. It's all there for you on KGET.com.